Hey, what's up? This is Mr. Ippolito, and today we are taking a look at Chapter 8, Section 4 in the textbook, but specifically taking a look at the two things that I think are most important. Number one is Transcendentalism in the literature of the 1800s, and then the Hudson River School, which is not actually a school. It's not a place you go to school to learn, but rather it was a school of artists, right, or a group of artists that had a particular style of painting, a particular style of art in the 1800s. So if I'm taking you through Chapter 8, so you want to start by, you can kind of look briefly at the sort of the background and, talking about referencing Greek and Roman myths. And these themes are good. It's interesting. I think that this literature here comes out of the Hudson River Valley also. So there's a lot of culture, both literature and the arts that is coming out of the Hudson River Valley, which is the river valley north of New York City in New York along the Hudson River Valley and in the Catskills Mountains. In one of the other videos you're gonna watch, you're gonna see that sort of the geography of the Hudson River Valley. So pay attention to that. But this is that literature movement I was talking about, Transcendentalism, right? And I'm going to let you read it, but I've done some annotating and highlighting for you. If you look at the digital copy that's in our learning guide, it talks about how Transcendentalism, that movement, that these writers were all about, like tapping into your emotions and the way that people's emotions connect to nature and to imagination. It really made me think, as I learned growing up and at your age in high school and college, kind of made me think of the hippies, sort of this counterculture movement of the 1960s and 1970s. If you've ever heard of them, this is my parents' generation, probably your grandparents' generation, right? So sort of that like peace, love, anti-war, counterculture, connect with nature of the 1960s and 1970s. It's interesting to point out that in the 60s and 70s, the 1960s and 1970s, we have the Vietnam War that's going on. You'll learn about that in 11th grade history. But it's interesting that this movement, the hippies, this counterculture movement, grows out of in part, a resistance to the Vietnam War and a response to the Vietnam War, and they were very much against the Vietnam War. And so I want you to think of how these transcendentalists, if they were also anti-war, what war of the 1840s might they be against? If they are in the North, right, they're primarily in New York and Massachusetts, they're in the Northeast. And if you think back to 1846 to 1848, what war would the Southerners and the Westerners would have been like? Yeah, let's go. But like many in the Northeast would probably be opposed to. If you think of that, and if your answer is the Mexican War, then you're right. So both of these movements, the Transcendentalist movement of the 1840s and 1850s, and sort of the hippies, this hippie anti-war movement of the 1960s and 1970s, a little over 100 years later, both responding to what they thought were unjust wars, unnecessary loss of life, and kind of a government overreach. So interesting to kind of, look at that. Look at the Transcendentalists. They urge people to live simply and to seek beauty, goodness, and truth within their own souls. My goodness, that sounds a lot like the hippies of the 60s, the 1960s. So anyway, I want you to continue to read. I'd like for you to learn about Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, the two leading Transcendentalists of the time. I'm going to have you skip over some of this stuff. Herman Melville, he was an anti-transcendentalist. We're going to talk about him in just a moment. But I wanted to also briefly talk about Henry David Thoreau and this idea of civil disobedience, the idea that people should peacefully disobey unjust laws if their consciences demand it. So this is the Thoreau was opposed to war. He was, as you can see here in the reading, Thoreau spent a night in jail for refusing to pay a tax that he felt supported slavery. So this idea of civil disobedience, this idea of passive resistance, disobeying laws that you feel are not right, that is going to influence other leaders like Gandhi. You're going to learn about Mahatma Gandhi in India in the 1940s. In 10th grade world history, and then you're going to learn, of course, about Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and he was also inspired for that with that passive resistance and that civil disobedience. Okay, moving forward a little bit more quickly, these two authors, they're anti-transcendentalists. I don't need for you to learn about them. Interesting to note, the Transcendentalists were all about connecting with nature and becoming one with nature and connecting the nature and your emotions. And here, this novel, Moby Dick, is about like going and hunting down and killing the white whale. So it's really sort of like, instead of humans connecting with nature, it's humans conquering nature. That was kind of the whole theme of Moby Dick. So anyway, moving on. The other thing that I want you to focus on in this chapter is the Hudson River School. So again, this school of artists, and you're going to see some more paintings from them, but this school of artists that really kind of emphasizes the relationship between people and nature, similar to the Transcendentalists, right? So you're going to learn about them. Again, this whole section here, it's nice, but it's not needed, so you can honestly just skip over that part because there's so much to learn. There's just too much to learn. This is what I really want you to focus on right here, this part in blue, Painting America, because this is on the Hudson River School. Those paintings and the artists who were inspired by the natural beauty of the Catskills Mountains and the Hudson River Valley and things like that. So I want you to focus on that, and then that's pretty much it for this chapter here. When we talk about popular songs and popular music, we're going to learn about that in our Civil War unit. So if you're like, oh, Mr. Pluto, I want to learn about music, the history of American music, we are going to get to that a little bit later on when we learn a little bit about enslavement in this unit, and then also in the Civil War in the next unit. So basically, the bottom line of this whole chapter is this section of the reading is that concepts like individualism, civil disobedience, they continue to affect people's lives and actions. So just trying to find a way to connect sort of past with present, and specifically kind of focusing on the connections between the Hudson River School, that sort of school of art and school of thought, and what they included as their themes, and the Transcendentalists, right, again, all happening in the mid-1800s. Okay, that's it. My 7 minutes are up, and so have a great day, and thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.